currently at Clarence Road in Ipswich.
Could you open the door, please? I'd just like to speak with you.
This is a story of how cold case investigators solved a murder that many thought would be undetected forever.
I accepted that some murders just never get solved.
Who was this killer who'd struck in the night, fled, and continued his life as normal?
I would describe his behaviour simply as predatory.
What other dark secrets did he hide from his family and friends?
He wasn't physically imposing. I'd have no concern with my partner going over it.
And how did evidence in these boxes bring the man to justice after nearly 60 years?
Gives me goosebumps. It actually does give me goosebumps now.
My name's Robert Murphy. This is Cold Case Justice, solving the murder of Louisa Dunne. Easton in Bristol is today, as it was in the 1960s, a close community. Families, young professionals and pensioners. And people awoke as normal on June the 28th, 1967, but soon news started spreading that in one of their terraces, behind one of their doors, there had been a murder. A killer had attacked a woman and disappeared, his identity a mystery. And his victim? Well, everyone knew her. Her name was Louisa Dunne, a well-known and quite sad character in her community. Her fate, in fact her last few decades, was so different from the life she'd dreamt of as a young mother, because once she'd had dreams and status. Born in 1892, she married a rising politician in Bristol, Teddy Parker. They had 2 daughters. This is her eldest, Edna, in 1919, when Louisa was 27. Edna has died, but her daughter, Mary Dainton, heard of Louisa's early life of promise and love.
My grandmother supported my grandfather. In the photographs I have of her, she's always with my grandfather. She's never on her own. I don't think I've got a picture of her on her own.
Like many women, Louisa's social life and her fortunes were tied to her husband's. This was a Labour Party summer school in the countryside. But it all collapsed with Teddy's health. A stroke left him in hospital for years, and by the time of this publicity photo, being wheeled to vote in Labour's 1945 landslide election, he'd just 4 months left to live.
She would have been lonely, I should think. And also to have had that kind of life suddenly stopped because your husband wasn't there anymore, was dead.
Louisa's life disintegrated. Teddy had been her rock. Now her daughter Edna here watched as her mother descended into alcoholism. Mother and daughter became estranged. Louisa remarried a night watchman, John Dunne, who died in the early 1960s. And her granddaughter has just one memory of meeting Louisa when she was a child.
I remember my grandmother being very keen to be friendly with me and to make some kind of contact. And she held my hand very, very tightly and she frightened me.
Louisa Dunne lacked contact with her family, but she had friends. She was a big part of the community here in Easton. Every day she would stand here by her front door, passing comment, saying hello. But something awful happened behind this door in the early hours of June the 28th, 1967. Neighbours described hearing screams, a woman's scream, as if she were being attacked. The following day, Louisa Dunne wasn't here by her front door in her usual place, but the sash window here was open. Now that never happened. She was so security conscious. Neighbours called friends. They looked here through the window, beyond the curtains, and saw lying on the floor the body of Louisa Dunne. Police were called, and a murder inquiry began, led by Detective Chief Superintendent Reginald Hicks. While the headlines terrified the neighbourhood, a widow murdered, the small print sent a chill through this district. Louisa had also been raped and robbed. Her handbags had been opened. The case became the City of Bristol Police's most important investigation. Hundreds of officers were drafted in, including Bob Day, who was then a 29-year-old temporary sergeant who made door-to-door inquiries. Bearing in mind just how awful and notorious this crime was already, what was the reaction from the people?
They were extremely helpful, and they were extremely revolted by the nature of the crime.
Yeah.
They were really outstandingly helpful, which is good.
There were clues. The first, a palm print. Detectives discovered it on the rear upper window, which someone, they assumed the killer, had opened. But the bedroom door was locked from the corridor, so the intruder had gone to the rear ground floor and entered that way. The print became the focus. Police mounted a massive fingerprint operation. They took prints of every man aged between 15 and 60 in the Easton district. They went up every road in the area, taking nearly 20,000 prints. Slow, laborious, and unsuccessful. But there were other possibilities. As well as the palm print, scientists took a swab from Louisa's autopsy which had traces of semen. 20 years before DNA, they would still be able to identify the killer's blood type. Her skirt, there might be marks from the killer left on that, and how he broke in. His modus operandi was also, in a way, a clue which Bob Day focused on.
It could have been a service, somebody in the services, like a bread man or some delivery man of some sort or something, but they had to have cased her joint, to cased her house, to know the situation, who would be there and who wasn't. So that's what we're looking for, someone who was foreign to their usual people that they see around there.
And across the city, in a student house, Louisa's estranged granddaughter discovered about the murder in a newspaper.
I picked up the Evening Post, I think it was, and I said, what's on it, the picture? Should we all go to the flicks later? And at the back, they had all the obituaries. And there it was, a tiny little column about my grandmother. And I didn't know her name was Dunne, but I knew her name was Louisa, and it said 58 Britannia Road, and I knew that's where she lived. So I went, in those days we didn't have a phone at home either, and there were no mobile phones. So I went straight to my mother and caught the bus to see my mum. And I got there and said, is it Gram? And she said, yes. And she was in a bit of a state emotionally, but she was so used to putting a brave face on things.
As the complexity of the violent death of an estranged matriarch sunk in, police continued their efforts. In Bristol, nationally, abroad to Ireland, to Canada even. In 1973, the lead detective, Reg Hicks, retired, but still told HTV News of his hope.
Are you at all sad in any way on leaving the force today with any particular crimes unsolved?
Yes. I've had since I've been a chief superintendent, we had the old lady, Louisa Dunne, at Easton in 1967, and of course the sad job of the boy Philip Green at Sherhampton Golf Course in April 1970.
Do you think there's any possibility that those cases will in fact still be solved?
Well, I should like to think that someone would come forward with some very vital information in order that those two jobs could be solved.
His sentiment wasn't shared by Louisa's family.
I accepted it. I accepted that some murders just never get solved. And some people just have to live with that emptiness and that sadness.
But as Louisa's family coped in their grief, over the decades, there were developments. 20 years later, in 1987, just a mile away here at Bristol Crown Court, history was made with the world's first conviction based on the new science of genetic fingerprinting, or DNA. The Bristol rapist Robert Melias was jailed. Now this would always be overshadowed by the later conviction of the killer Colin Pitchfork. But these would revolutionise policing, not just live cases, but historic ones too. Like Louisa Dunne's inquiry, the investigation had been given the codename Operation Beetle. It had been stored in Avon and Somerset Police's cold case warehouse, a high-security, secret location where the paperwork and evidence of the force's 30 unsolved murders are locked away. It's the force's 5th oldest case here. Forever undetected was the rather sad status it had endured for more than half a century. The cold case team had a new head appointed in late 2023, Detective Inspector Dave Marchant, a policeman struck by the possibilities in cold case developments.
Every time I walk in here, I feel sort of a sense of excitement that you know what's in these boxes. You've got reams of paperwork, items, exhibits that are just waiting for someone with a fresh pair of eyes, with the newest, latest and greatest forensic technology that's available to us, to take another look and try and do what hasn't been done before.
Louisa's case had been reviewed twice since the DNA revolution, the first time in 2009 and again in 2014. What could cold case investigators and scientists do now that hadn't been achieved a decade before?
We did have a number of exhibits that still were held by the police in our major crime archive stores, and we also had quite a degree of the original investigative paperwork still to hand.
Yeah, there was an incomplete female.
Forensic coordinator Heidi Miller was assigned to the case, and she was struck by the possibilities.
Now, if I was presented with that type of case now, that it would be really hard for it to go unsolved, just because of all the opportunities we now have, especially with DNA and the advances in DNA technology. So that for me was quite exciting, that we had so many exhibits still available to us.
Immediately, they saw opportunity.
We had items of clothing, we had underwear, we had sort of tapings from various areas, we had swabs, we had sort of so many exhibits. I mean, it is difficult to know exactly where to start.
We didn't believe that the skirt had undergone any forensic examination. So at that point, when I understood the nature of the offences, the evidence that we still had available in terms of the exhibits, and also having reviewed the scene photographs, I was really quite excited at the prospect of, well, here's something which could give us some positive results.
Cold case investigators reviewed the clues. Remember, they had at least 4 key leads. By 2024, they could get the killer's DNA profile from the intimate swab. Were there further possibilities with the skirt or the palm print? By now, the easiest way to get DNA was from the swab taken from Louisa's autopsy, but they hit a wall immediately.
We knew that we had a swab from our deceased, which had bodily fluids on it, but that swab was no longer. It couldn't be found anywhere, so it had been destroyed potentially. It wasn't in the archives.
This was a big loss. The biggest clue, the easiest way to finding the DNA and Louisa Dunne's killer had vanished. But there was hope. So next they looked at the skirt. There's often a high presence of DNA in semen, so they screened the skirt for a chemical called acid phosphatase, which is also prevalent in sex stains. It was a simple equation: find the stain, find the killer. Unfortunately, these had degraded, been obliterated by the passing of time, it seemed. And if there were no stains, there was potentially no DNA on this vital piece of evidence. It looked as if there was nothing on the skirt, so the scientists tried one last technique.
His next option was to cut out various parts of that skirt and actually physically look at the material to see whether it had any semen on it.
Would the answer to this decades-old mystery lie deep in the fibres of the murder victim's skirt? These cuttings would be treated and placed under a microscope, invisible to the naked eye. Evidence which had never been looked at in this way before. Could it lead to the door of Louisa Dunne's killer?
He took an area at the front of the skirt and some at the back. The front was negative as well, but the back of the skirt basically had semen on and had a full DNA profile.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, it gives me goosebumps. It actually does give me goosebumps now.
They'd got a full DNA profile, but they didn't know who the killer was yet. They'd need to refer it to the National DNA Database. Now, there are about 6 million names on this. That's about 1 in 10 of the British population. They'd need the killer to have been arrested on suspicion of something or convicted of a crime since 1995, when the database was established. But these were exciting times. A few miles away, At her home in Bristol, Louisa Dunne's granddaughter was oblivious to the review, but aware of developments in police science.
I read detective books like other people do, so I knew about it. I never put the two things together because it didn't seem real.
Well, it was real in the cold case team because events were happening quickly. Heidi Miller took a phone call from the same forensic scientist.
I can't remember his exact words, but basically, hi Heidi, obviously we put the DNA on the database and we've got a hit, but I have no further knowledge. I don't know who that is. And I was like, what? I've never had that before. So yeah, I went straight through to our forensic submissions team, got the match report emailed over.
Completely out of the blue, not expecting it. We were in another meeting, I think talking about missing people with our colleagues from the National Crime Agency at the time. And I think a few of us had the same email, which look around the room as kind of incredulous. We're all looking at the same thing here. This moment of almost semi-disbelief, I had to read it several times to fully digest the gravity of what was in that email and the significance of it in terms of what it meant for this particular investigation.
The significance was they were just about to find the name of the man whose DNA had been found at Louisa Dunne's murder scene. They were about to find out, after nearly 60 years, the identity of her killer.
I ended the call with the Major Crime Review team and I rang our forensic submissions, and lo and behold, in their inbox was a match report, and that's the first time that I heard the name Ryland Headley. Yeah, makes me go quite cold.
It was a thrilling but serious moment. His name, Ryland Headley, meant nothing to police. He hadn't featured anywhere in the case in the 1960s. But he was on the National DNA database after he'd been arrested and released without charge for a suspected offence in Suffolk in 2012. And more importantly, 57 years after Louisa Dunne's murder, he was alive and living in a suburb of Ipswich.
The fact that he was a 92-year-old male, it was just insane, really. As much as you go into it with the intent to get a result, I think sometimes exhibits and, like you say, forensic reviews have been done so much and nothing's come back from them. And this, it just seemed to work.
What thoughts did you have, the chance of this man still being A, found, and B, alive?
Alive, yeah, and that was the next step. My first thought was, wow, he would never have thought that he's ever going to be brought to justice for this crime after all those years. I mean, you've held that secret for such a long time. That is, yeah, insane.
They had a DNA hit, they had a name, but they didn't have a case, not yet. Who was this man, this enigma who had evaded justice for half a century?
We were able to locate him in an address in Bristol, around 1.5 miles away from 58 Britannia Road in 1967 at the time of the offence. And we were able to establish that he disappears, or as best as we can tell, he disappears from records in Bristol shortly after that. And in the early 1970s, we understood he then had taken up residence in Ipswich.
For the past couple of decades of his life, Headley lived in this nice suburban street in East Ipswich. He was seen as a lovely old man. He would go to the shops every day, he would tend to his garden, he would do anything to help his neighbours. But he had this secret, a big secret. That he had got away with murder. His wife had gone to her grave not knowing her husband was a killer. He had lived his life as a machinist and a father and a grandfather. And a neighbour. James Spencer lives just nearby and has known Ryland Headley, even socialised with him over the past 5 years, oblivious that he was associating with a killer across the street. But did he give you any indication that he was someone who's capable of?
Not in the slightest. Simply because of the fact that he kept saying that everybody's is lucky to be in such a great neighbourhood, is lucky to have such great friends, is lucky to have the cat, is lucky to have his garden, is lucky to have his fish. He was very appreciative of everything around him, and he wasn't physically imposing. I'd have no concerns with my partner going over and seeing him or chatting to him.
But neighbours didn't know that Headley was a violent predator, After getting away with the murder of Louisa Dunne, he went on to prey on new victims in his new hometown, which detectives would discover when they looked at the Police National Computer, or PNC.
Ryland Headley's PNC record originates from the late 1970s, 1977 to be particular, and the record showed that there were 2 convicted rapes, both of them in October 1977 in the Ipswich area.
Ipswich's newspaper records aren't online, so I've travelled to Suffolk to look at the archives. Because on the microfilm are chilling details about James's neighbour and Louisa's killer. Here in the archives in Ipswich are the details of Ryland Headley's dark past. I'm looking at an article from a newspaper in 1978, May 78. It's about a court appearance the previous day. Ryland Headley had pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape against 2 elderly women. One was 79 and one was 84 years old. And there are some other similarities as well. The police response was very, very similar to the 1967 Bristol inquiry. Large fingerprint operation, everyone aged 15 and above, every man aged 15 and above was fingerprinted. Thousands of prints were taken, but in this case, that fingerprint operation led directly to Headley's door. This is a terrifying article. It's from 1979, and Ryland Headley has just had his life sentence reduced to just 7 years. What's happened, he's been examined by doctors in prison, and they describe him as not being a criminal psychopath. And more than that, they blame his offences, those rapes against the 2 elderly women, they blame that on an unhappy marriage to an ambitious and demanding wife. They also say that Headley is unlikely to offend again. So Headley was jailed, but just for a few years. This was before DNA, and Suffolk police held a public ceremonial burning of the thousands of fingerprints taken in Ipswich which had been negative. And Headley's prints were never compared with the palm print found at Louisa Dunne's home. He had been jailed for rape, but he was still getting away with murder. But in 2024, the DNA case against him was getting even bigger.
We also established that we had other exhibits still that remained, some hair samples taken from Louisa's body during the post-mortem examination that we also submitted to the scientists, and both of those came back with Ryland Headley's DNA present on them.
We're currently at Clarence Road in Ipswich to effect the arrest of a Ryland Headley.
In November 2024, police were preparing to arrest Headley.
His welfare is really key to us because, one, I don't want the defence to turn around and say we've abrogated his rights and we've kind of been unfair and prejudicial to him just because of the nature of the offence, but also, bluntly, to make sure that he's in a fit state to stand trial and face justice at the end of this. I don't want us to kick the door down with someone who has to go sideways to the door because they're big and angry and give him a heart attack. I wanted to make sure that he was dealt with sensitively, empathetically.
Thank you very much.
Who are you?
I'll explain. I'm from the police.
You what?
I'm from the police.
What?
Good morning. Hello. I'm from the police.
What here?
I'm from the police. My name's Naomi Main. I'm a detective. May I come in, please?
No. You can't come now. I'm just come now. Where you want to come in for?
I'll explain because it's a bit sensitive, so we'd like to come in and speak to you properly, please.
Eh?
May I come in to speak to you properly? I'm here today because I'm arresting you on suspicion of the rape and murder of Louisa Dunne, which happened in Bristol in June 1967. The reason I'm arresting you is because the police have investigative material that indicates you are responsible for that rape and murder of Mrs. Dunne, which happened at Britannia Road in Easton, Bristol, June 1967.
It was a huge range of emotions, nervousness, because this is what we'd been working towards for months, wondering, what's going to happen next, those silences, in the radio chatter as they're doing what they need to do at his address, and then finally getting the confirmation that he'd been arrested safely and everyone was okay. It was a huge sense of relief that moment to know that all that work up to that point had been, well thought out and had come to a positive result at that stage.
Once Mr. Headley was arrested, had his DNA and live scan fingerprints taken, they were also able to match the palm mark on the frame of the window to Mr. Headley as well.
And how important is that to the case?
Well, it's fantastic because it actually puts him at the point of entry as well as in the premises or on the skirt. So yes, that's amazing.
And Mary Dainton, who'd accepted decades earlier that her grandmother's murder would be forever unsolved, had a call from police who told her,
"This is about your grandmother." And I said, "Have they caught him?" This came out, I never thought I'd say anything like that. "Have you caught him?" And she said, "We have a suspect." I think I was in shock for quite a long time, for quite a few weeks. I wandered around like I was feeling it out, living in a dream completely. This was a nightmare, because I was, and I still am, processing what I should have processed when I was 19.
I need to find out why you're here to start with, so you're going to have to bear with me.
Across the country, in Ipswich, Ryland Headley was being processed by police into custody.
Mr. Headley committed the rape and murder of a lady called Mrs. Louisa Dunne, which occurred in June 1967.
And the questioning began.
So if you had entered via that upstairs window, you would have been trapped in the bedroom. Is that why?
Would he admit what detectives knew he had done?
Did this not happen? You can tell me if this is rubbish and it didn't happen.
It quickly became clear he was giving nothing away.
No comment.
Okay.
At one point, he even finds some of the questioning amusing.
It's annoying. You often climbed up 2 windows and this and that, people's house. No comment.
Mixed emotions of, relief that, he was safely in custody and we could carry on with our investigation, but disgust at knowing, the offences which we'd arrested him for.
And as the questioning deepens, the answers remain at the same non-committal tone.
There were a number of people nearby who heard a scream in the early hours of the morning.
No comment.
Did Louisa scream?
No comment.
What made her scream?
No comment.
Can you tell me how Louisa died?
No comment.
Did she die as a result of your actions?
No comment.
And if so, what were your actions?
No comment.
He gave a predominantly no-comment interview to police in November last year. And his defence case statement, when it was submitted, again, denied any responsibility, had not been to the address, didn't know Louisa, denied any culpability or involvement in the offences, gave no indication as to why his sperm might have been on all those exhibits that we'd submitted and had positive results back for, showing his DNA present.
The prosecution would have to prove to a jury that Headley was guilty. Headley's simple argument was, "I didn't do it." In court, Headley and his barrister could kick up dust, tell a jury that the palm print wasn't really a match, argue that decades-old evidence had been contaminated. But police and prosecutors were confident.
This DNA from that skirt is from semen, so the scientist is happy to say that. So, potentially if that skirt had been held up by anyone in obviously with older cases, we've had that before, where things are used in media appeals, etc. Obviously this hasn't undergone that, but this is not touch DNA. This DNA is from semen.
As murder trials go, Ryland Headley's was comparatively short, and the jury heard about the DNA hit, about the palm print, and that he was a convicted rapist. Ryland Headley himself had the chance to give evidence. He could say whatever he wanted. "It wasn't me, there's been a mistake." But he chose not to, and perhaps his silence spoke 1,000 words. The jury deliberated long and hard, but finally, as Ryland Headley remained motionless in the dock, as Louisa Dunne's granddaughter watched from the public gallery, the foreman said they had found Headley guilty of Louisa's murder. Justice at last. And with this conviction, questions are now being asked. What kind of man could kill a woman, keep the secret to himself for nearly 60 years, and present himself to the world as a kindly old grandfather?
I don't think anybody could do that unless they had a very distorted view of what is right and what is wrong.
I would describe his behaviour simply as predatory.
I think he's probably told himself lies in order to cope with it, and that he will never probably acknowledge the fact of what he's done.
For the suspects, I'm just glad that you haven't passed away, and that actually you can serve a sentence for your crime.
Of course, there are other victims in this case. Headley is a great-grandfather, beloved by his family.
From his family's point of view, it must also be horrific.
What a shock for his own children to have to live with. You know, you think about them, they're completely innocent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another big issue. So I've interacted with a few members of his family, most recently one of his daughters. I think it's going to be a real struggle for them coming to terms with it.
Ryland Headley was convicted 58 years and a couple of days after murdering Louisa Dunne, one of, if not the, biggest gaps between crime and punishment in British history. And thoughts turn now to the other cold cases kept in police stores that could be solved with modern techniques.
The science has changed so much over those years, and it will change so much in the future. So we still have lots of exhibits from all of these cases that we can potentially look to use in the future, even if we can't use them now.
Bravo, I think it is good. It's good for the community, it's good for everyone to think that there's, whatever case it is that they've been involved in, that they never give up. And we still go out looking to get the person responsible.
We have the skills, we've got the forensic expertise, we've got the material to hand. We are going to be relentless in trying to solve these crimes, to bring justice, to put those suspects behind bars, to get them duly convicted of the offences that they committed, and also to bring closure to those families, those next of kin, those sons, those daughters, those husbands, those wives, whose loved ones have been killed and taken away from them, those people who've got away with it and lived a life having taken a life. We're coming for you.
The prosecution and conviction of Ryland Headley is another example of the possibilities and potential new science presents in solving old cases. And more importantly, it gives the family of Louisa Dunne some of the answers to the questions they've been asking for nearly 6 decades.